The desert swallowed the road long before the asphalt gave way to dirt. At night, the two-lane highway cut through nothingness, and in that emptiness, headlights seemed less like beams of light and more like a promise that something else existed. Beyond the horizon, 5 years ago, that stretch of road was the last anyone saw of Daniel Mercer and his wife Claire. Their friends described them as restless travelers, bound together by a love of wandering that often took them down forgotten highways and into unmarked towns. They left Phoenix on a warm September evening, intent on reaching Santa Fe by dawn, and never arrived. Search teams combed the desert in helicopters, dragging infrared cameras across dry riverbeds and scrubby mesas. Deputies pounded their boots into sand, finding nothing but wind-carved ridges and rattlesnake tracks. The Mercer's car, a pale blue Jeep Cherokee with cracked leather seats, vanished as thoroughly as they did. For weeks, their faces were taped to bulletin boards in gas stations and diners along the highway. But time faded their story into another unsolved disappearance, buried under the desert's indifference. 5 years later, on a breathless August night, something shifted in that emptiness. It started with a sound low, mechanical grinding, like a cough dredged from a throat that hadn't spoken in years. The single gas station in a ghost town called Ashthorne had been empty since the early 1990s. Its windows were dark, its pumps gutted, its roof warped by decades of sun. Nobody came through except the occasional drifter or storm chaser. Night, at 2 a.m, silence ruptured as the Jeep's engine turned over in the station's cracked lot. No key in the ignition, no driver behind the wheel. The headlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the boarded storefronts like a lighthouse searching for survivors. Then they clicked off, and the engine idled steady, humming in the town that no longer had a heartbeat. The next morning, a pair of truckers heading east stopped at the lot, drawn by the faint echo of gasoline and burned oil. They found the Jeep sitting perfectly intact, dust-free, as though it had just rolled off the assembly line. The license plate matched the one listed on the old missing persons posters. The truckers called it in, and within hours, deputies from 2 counties converged on Ashthorne. The desert had coughed up the dead couple's vehicle. But not the couple. Deputy Sheriff Morgan Klein was the first to slide behind the wheel, and she swore later that the upholstery smelled faintly of perfume, powdery and floral. Claire's purse was slumped on the passenger seat, as if she'd just dropped it there. Inside, her wallet still held her ID, her cards, even $28 in cash. A lipstick tube lay uncapped, its tip melted from the heat. On the back seat was a folded map with a ballpoint circle scrawled around Ashthorne, though nobody knew why the town was marked at all. Daniel's phone, dead and useless, was in the glove compartment. The most unsettling detail came when the deputies popped the trunk, 2 suitcases neatly packed, clothes folded, shoes paired. It was as if the Mercers had only stepped out 4. A moment the news spread faster than desert wind. The town's name, long erased from most maps, flared back into headlines. Reporters descended on the highway, kicking up dust clouds in pursuit of a story too strange to ignore. Theories bloomed like weeds. Some claimed the Jeep had been stolen, driven across the border, and abandoned years later. Others whispered about desert cults, ghost towns, cursed by lost miners, or even UFOs. A late-night radio host announced that the Mercers had slipped into another dimension and their car had just slipped back out. Morgan didn't believe in curses or aliens, but she couldn't shake the unease when she leaned against the Jeep's hood, hearing the engine tick cool after hours of running. The odometer read exactly what it had 5 years ago. No extra miles. No sign it had been driven at all. Shouldn't have been possible. 2 days after the Jeep appeared, the county impound lot locked it behind chain-link fencing. Investigators ran fingerprints, forensics, and chemical swabs. Every test came back with a contradiction. The car's fluids were fresh, as if they'd been replaced yesterday. But dust samples collected from the undercarriage dated to half a decade ago. Tire treads were sharp, unworn, yet trapped in the wheel wells were brittle insects, sun-bleached, and long dead. It was both new and old, clean and decayed, alive and abandoned. Morgan drove out to Ashthorne again on her own. The town sat 30 miles off the main highway. It's an old mining settlement that had dried up in the late 1960s. 24 buildings remained. A church with shattered stained glass. A row of clapboard storefronts. The rusted husk of a motel. Tumbleweeds lodged themselves in door frames, and every window gaped like a hollow eye. No power, no residents, no reason for anyone to stop. Yet as she walked the dirt streets, she felt the static of being watched.
The kind of weight you can't
prove but can't shake either. Her boots stirred dust thick with silence. She stood at the center of the lot where the Jeep had been discovered, staring at the cracked pavement. There were no tire marks, no footprints. Just the Jeep, materialized from nowhere. Sitting patient like it had been waiting, the case report thickened daily, page after page of questions without answers. Daniel's parents arrived from Oregon, hollowed by years of grief, only to have it reopened. Claire's sister came, trembling as she clutched her sibling's purse, whispering that it still smelled like her perfume. News crews filmed from behind the fence at the impound lot, their cameras drinking in the Jeep's pale blue shell. They wanted closure. They wanted ghosts to speak. But the desert does not give freely. It only takes, and sometimes it returns, what it has taken but never whole, never without change. The first real break in the case came not from the Jeep itself, but from the gas station where it was found. When investigators swept the interior, they noticed something odd scratched faintly into the dusty countertop, beneath layers of grime. Help us. 2018. The letters were shallow, rushed, etched by something sharp like a key. Night, the Mercers vanished. Morgan stood over those words, her skin prickling, the desert sun hammering her shoulders. The plea was desperate, raw, so someone had pressed it into the counter in the last moments before something unspeakable took them. But why there? Why in Ashthorne, a town they weren't even supposed to pass through? Why had the Jeep only come back now, 5 years later, humming to life like it had never been gone? She looked up at the boarded windows, the empty lots. Ashthorne had nothing left to offer. Nothing but whispers caught in dry wind. And yet, for reasons no one could yet understand, this ghost town had become the last chapter in the Mercers' story. And, Morgan thought grimly, maybe the first chapter of something far worse. The desert remembers differently than people do. Doesn't archive facts or dates, doesn't hold the sequence of events in neat order, keeps things in fragments. A scrap of paper carried on the wind, a voice half buried under sand, a rusted canteen beneath a rock. To chase a mystery in the desert is to chase echoes. Deputy Sheriff Morgan Klein sat in her cruiser outside the impound lot, staring through the fence at the Jeep. Its paint caught the sodium lights, pale and ghostly. It looked ordinary enough, a machine built to endure, yet something about it felt alive, or worse, aware. She couldn't shake the impression that if she unlocked it now and turned the key, the engine would greet her like an old friend. She opened her notebook. The timeline still didn't make sense. The Mercers left Phoenix at 8:47 p.m. on September 13th, 2018. Surveillance footage caught there. Jeep passing a gas station near Holbrook 2 hours later. After that, nothing. Phones went dark. Credit cards unused. Then 5 years of silence. Until the Jeep resurrected itself in Ashthorne. Morgan's pen tapped the paper. Help us. 2018. That scratch on the countertop gnawed her. She had spent years in law enforcement, and she knew desperation when she saw it. Those letters weren't graffiti, weren't idleness. They were written by someone who believed they were about to vanish into a place no one could follow. Her radio crackled. Klein, you copy? She lifted the mic. Go ahead. Got something you're going to want to see. Come down to evidence. When she walked into the sheriff's basement, the air smelled faintly of dust and antiseptic. The evidence techs had laid out everything recovered from the Jeep. Maps, wallets, clothes, suitcases, purses. A plastic bin sat apart, marked with tape. Inside was Claire's camera. We pulled the memory card, the tech said. It's degraded, but we got partial recovery. You'll want to see this. The monitor flickered to life. Photo after photo filled the screen. Red mesas against blue skies. Daniel grinning at a rest stop. Claire leaning against the Jeep's hood with sunglasses catching the sun. They were the images of a couple traveling through nowhere, savoring isolation. Then the tone shifted. One picture showed Ashthorne's main street, its boarded storefronts standing crooked. The time stamp. 11:19 p.m., September 13th. The Jeep. Shouldn't have been anywhere near Ashthorne. The road was 30 miles off their route. No reason to go there. Another image, captured less than a minute later, showed the old gas station. Its windows reflected faint light, though the building had no power. Then the photographs blurred, as though taken in motion. Shadows streaked. One frame caught Daniel's face in panic, mouth open like he was shouting. Another showed Claire's hand raised, palm outward as if trying to block the lens. The last file was corrupted, split by static, but in the ruin of pixels, Morgan swore she saw something tall, human-shaped, standing just behind them. Her skin prickled. She asked for a copy of the files, sliding the drive into her pocket before leaving the basement. That night, she dreamed of Ashthorne. She stood. In its center, the Jeep idling nearby. The wind whispered, carrying voices that weren't hers. She turned, and the storefront windows stared back. Each pane reflecting not the empty streets, but crowded faces, hundreds of them, pressed against the glass. Mouthing words she couldn't hear. When she woke, the clock read 3:33 a.m. the next day. She drove to Ashthorne again, this time with Detective Ryan Maddox from the State Bureau. Maddox was skeptical, a pragmatist who didn't believe in ghost stories. He carried himself like a man who'd seen too many murders and was allergic to speculation. They parked at the edge of town, the sun low, shadows long. "Looks like a set from a bad western," Maddox muttered. Morgan didn't answer. She led him to the gas station. Inside, dust coated everything. The scratched words "Help US" waited on the counter unchanged. Maddox crouched to examine them. "Could have been carved any time," he said. "You're seeing what you want to see." "Maybe," Morgan replied. "But Claire's camera has photos of this place. They were here the night they disappeared. Then, maybe they broke down, got lost. Deserts full of bodies nobody ever finds." Morgan turned, staring out the grimy window, then explained how the Jeep just came back, engine running, fluids fresh, like it never left. Maddox didn't answer. They searched the church next. Its doors hung broken, pews collapsed in splinters. The altar was coated in dust, but something odd marked the stone floor before it. A circle drawn in white chalk, edges blurred as if smudged by hurried feet. Within it lay blackened candle stubs. Maddox frowned. Teenagers, ritual crap. Morgan knelt. The chalk was old, brittle, but not decades old. She touched it, feeling grit flake under her fingers. "This isn't from the 60s, she murmured. "This was used." The silence around them grew heavy, pressing like weight on her chest. She heard it then, a faint sound, far off, like a door closing. Maddox stiffened too. They weren't alone. They moved outside, scanning the street. The town lay still, every window hollow. Then something shifted at the corner of the old motella. Curtain twitched, just barely. Morgan's breath hitched. She whispered, "Someone's here." They advanced, weapons drawn. The motel's lobby was wrecked, counters rotted, floorboards soft. The curtain that moved hung in a room near the end of the hall. Maddox kicked the door open. Inside, dust plumed. A mattress lay on the floor, rotted through. On the wall, scratched. Deep into plaster were the same words from the gas station, "Help us." Dozens of times. Over and over, some carved violently, others shaky and faint. Layered until the wall was a chorus of desperation. Morgan stared, her throat dry. The air felt wrong, too still. She whispered, "They were here." Then the floor groaned. From somewhere beneath them came a low, vibrating hum, steady as a pulse. Maddox shined his light toward the corner where the floorboards gaped. Through the crack, faint light glowed, plowish, like gas flame. Neither spoke. They both knew the Jeep's engine wasn't the only thing in Ashthorne that had learned. To start itself? The glow seeped between the motel's floorboards like breath under a locked door. Morgan crouched, pressing her ear close. The humming was steady, mechanical yet alive, vibrating against her jawbone. Maddox swore under his breath, shoving at the rotted boards until one cracked loose. The space beneath wasn't a crawl space at all. It dropped into darkness, the faint blue light flickering far below. The hum thickened, resonant enough to make Morgan's teeth ache. She glanced at Maddox. His face was pale, his skepticism straining. "Basement?" he asked. "There shouldn't be one," Morgan said. "These motels were built cheap. No basements, just slab." They fetched flashlights from the cruiser and returned, prying wider the gap. A crude staircase revealed itself, narrow steps descending into cold. Dust fell like ash as they moved boards aside. The humming deepened as though acknowledging them. Maddox muttered, "This is the part in the horror movie where the idiots go down." Morgan's light cut into the hole. The blue glow shimmered faintly, like reflections underwater. Her gut twisted, but she knew they had no choice. The Mercers had left their words on these walls. Whatever happened 5 years ago, it started. Down there, they descended. The air was wrong, cool, damp, metallic. Their boots echoed hollow against stone. The staircase opened into a chamber far larger than any foundation should have allowed. Its walls were cut into bedrock, raw and uneven. In the center stood a machine. It was cobbled together from rusted generators, warped panels, car batteries, corroded green. Wires twisted like vines connecting into a central core that pulsed with faint light. The hum vibrated from within it, steady as a heartbeat. Symbols had been scrawled across the walls in chalk. Crude circles intersected with jagged lines, half erased but still visible. Morgan's beam swept across the floor and caught something that froze her. A shoe. Women's, worn, dusty. Recognized it from Claire's suitcase inventory. Beside it lay a water bottle with the Mercer's fingerprints. Logged years earlier when the case first opened, "They were down here," Morgan whispered. Maddox walked closer to the machine. Its light played across its surface. This thing's a death trap. Batteries, fuel cells, wiring. None of it should still be running. He leaned closer, but it is. Morgan circled the chamber. Her light landed on more words scratched into the rock. "Don't listen." Over and over. Carved until the stone itself had flaked. A sound broke through then, cutting across the hum. Faint footsteps above, deliberate, moving through the motel. Both froze, listening. The boards creaked. Something shifted weight, slow and heavy, circling the room overhead. Morgan snapped her light off. The hum filled the silence again, deeper now. As though the machine fed on their fear, the steps stopped. Then from above a voice thin stretched, brittle like paper tearing. "Claire." Morgan's blood chilled. It was Daniel's voice. She'd heard recordings of it in old home videos, had listened to him laugh in interviews played for investigators. This was the same tone, only wrong, cracked like it had passed through too much distance. Maddox whispered, "No way, he's dead." The voice came again. "Help us." The machine flickered, its blue light surging. For an instant, the chamber, walls lit like daylight, revealing more carvings, spirals, jagged lines, words etched in panic. Then the glow died back to its faint shimmer. Morgan's instincts screamed. Whatever was speaking above them wasn't Daniel Mercer. They backed toward the stairs, flashlights trembling. When they climbed up and pushed into the motel room, the air was suffocatingly still. Dust lay undisturbed. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there at all. Maddox swore. "I heard it." "So did I," Morgan said. They left Ashthorne at dawn, the sky bleeding red behind them. Neither spoke on the drive, though both kept glancing at the horizon in the mirrors, half expecting the town to follow. The next days blurred with reports, evidence analysis, pressure from the press. The sheriff's office wanted answers. The families wanted closure. But Morgan couldn't stop replaying the words scratched into stone. "Don't listen." She felt them pressing against her skull whenever the wind went still. Then came the first. break since the Jeep. An old man walked into the sheriff's lobby one morning. Skin like parchment, beard wiry and yellowed, clothes reeking of desert. He gave his name as Elijah Crow. His eyes were pale blue, almost white. And when he fixed them on Morgan, she felt as though he saw every sleepless night she'd had. "I heard you found the car," rasped. Morgan exchanged a look with the desk sergeant. "You knew the Mercers?" "No, but I knew Ashthorne." He leaned on the counter. "You need to leave it alone. Whatever's down there, it's not for you." Morgan felt her pulse spike. Down where? Crow's lips cracked into a grim line. "That town's been wrong since before my daddy was born. Folks built it on a vein of emptiness. Thought they struck silver, but it wasn't silver. It wasn't anything this world has a name for." Maddox, standing nearby, scoffed. "Great. Another desert prophet." Crow ignored him. "I stayed." "On Morgan, that machine you found it ain't a machine. It's a mouth. And mouths don't care what they eat. You get close, it'll start whispering, mackin' promises. It don't stop until you give it something. That's how it keeps itself running." Morgan's throat went dry. "The Mercers." Crow nodded slowly. "They heard it. Everybody hears it, if they stay long enough." She asked him why the Jeep came back. His answer was colder than the desert night, because it's hungry again. Elijah Crow's words clung to Morgan long after he shuffled out of the sheriff's office, his boots dragging dust across the floor. She watched him through the blinds as he limped into the street, swallowed by sunlight. Maddox muttered something about lunatics, but Morgan couldn't shake the weight of what Crow had said. A mouth, not a machine. That night, she sat in her apartment with the recovered photos on her laptop. Each frame of Daniel and Claire was more unbearable than the last. She paused at the blurred one the image corrupted, static tearing across the pixels. She zoomed in until the screen fractured, but the figure behind them remained. Too tall, too narrow, wrong in its proportions, as if the desert itself had tried to imitate a man and failed. She closed the laptop. Silence pressed down on her. Almost welcomed it till she realized it wasn't silence at all. A faint hum threaded through the room, so low she thought at first it was her blood in her ears. Then the glass of water on her table rippled. She stood abruptly, heart pounding. The hum swelled, not from outside, but from beneath. The phone rang, jolting her. She grabbed it. Maddox's voice came through, thin and frayed. "You hear it too." Morgan swallowed. "When did it start?" 10 minutes ago." "My apartment." Floors vibrating. They met an hour later outside the impound lot, headlights washing over the chain-link fence. The Jeep sat inside, pale under the floodlights. Its hood was warm, though no one had touched it. The hum thickened as they approached, crawling up their bones. Maddox leaned close, his hand brushing the metal. "Coming from the car." Morgan stared. "No, it's coming from Ashthorne. The car's just carrying it." The floodlight above them flickered. For a second, shadows stretched wrong longer than they should, bending not away from the light but toward it. Maddox stepped back, cursing under his breath. Morgan forced herself to breathe. "If it's starting again, we have to go back. We have to know what happened to them." Maddox's face was pale, but he nodded. "Tomorrow, daylight, and we bring back up." But daylight didn't ease the town. The next morning they returned. With 2 deputies and a camera crew from the bureau, Ashthorne sat waiting, its streets hushed, windows blind. Dust swirled around them, tasting metallic. Morgan led them straight to the motel. The staircase yawned open where they had left it. Boards pried aside, the hum had grown stronger, pulsing up through the earth. One of the deputies muttered a prayer. They descended again, this time with cameras rolling. The chamber looked unchanged, the crude wiring, the pulsing core, the scrawled symbols. But something new lay on the floor. A Polaroid photo, fresh and crisp, untouched by dust. Morgan bent to pick it up. Her stomach dropped. It showed her and Maddox standing in the chamber, flashlights raised. Only the photo's timestamp read September 13th, 2018, the night the Mercers disappeared. She whispered, "This isn't possible." The deputies shifted uneasily. Maddox snatched the photo, flipping it over. Blank on the back. He dropped it like it burned him. Then the hum surged. Lights in the chamber flared, brighter than before, casting shadows that bent unnaturally. The camera crew scrambled, shouting about interference as their equipment glitched. The chalk circles on the walls seemed to pulse, and beneath it all, faint but clear, came voices. Daniel's, sharp with fear. "Claire, don't look at it, Claire's strangled. Help us then." A third, layered and deep, not human. It didn't speak words but pushed them into their skulls like pressure. "Stay, stay, stay." One deputy panicked and bolted up the stairs. His scream echoed only once before cutting off. The others froze, terror pinning them. Morgan's instincts screamed the same warning carved into stone. "Don't listen." She clamped her hands over her ears, shouting to Maddox, "Ignore it! Don't let it in!" But Maddox was staring at the machine, his face slack, eyes unfocused. The blue glow reflected in his pupils like twin flames. He whispered something. She couldn't hear. She grabbed him, yanking him toward the stairs. "Maddox, move." They stumbled up, dragging the other deputy and crew behind. The chamber roared as if furious, the hum swelling into a howl that chased them into daylight. When they burst into the street, the motel's walls rattled. Dust swirled violently, a miniature storm whipping around the building. The deputy who had fled was gone. No footprints, no trace, only silence. They drove back in shaken silence. None of the cameras worked, the footage was static, audio warped into guttural noise. The Polaroid photo remained, proof of something they couldn't explain. That night, Morgan sat in her cruiser outside the impound lot again, staring at the Jeep. She thought about Elijah Crow's words. "A mouth doesn't care what it eats." And she realized with a sinking weight Ashthorne had fed on the Mercers 5 years ago. Now it was hungry again. The question that gnawed at her wasn't what it wanted. She already knew. The question was who it would take next. The desert night closed in heavy, suffocating. Morgan sat in her cruiser, engine idling, watching the Jeep through the chain-link fence. Its pale frame seemed to glow faintly beneath the lot's floodlights, though she told herself it was only reflection. Still, she couldn't shake the sense that the vehicle was breathing. Her radio hissed with static. A voice bled through, faint, strained, stretched thin as old tape. "Morgan," she froze. The voice was Claire Mercer's. "Help us." Hand hovered over the mic. Training told her not to respond to phantom transmissions, but instinct clawed at her. "Ada?" She pressed the button. "Claire, where are you?" Nothing but static, a whisper like wind across stone. Then, layered beneath the noise, "Stay." Morgan dropped the mic, heart hammering. The floodlights flickered, and for a moment the Jeep's windows reflected not the empty lot but faces pressed. Against glass, Daniel and Claire, pale mouths open in silent screams. Then the lights steadied, and the reflections were gone. She couldn't stay alone.
Ow.
She drove to Maddox's apartment, pounding on his door until he answered. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling. "You heard it too," he said. She nodded. He let her in, and she saw the state of him TV, blaring static. Photos of Ashthorne spread across the table, half a bottle of whiskey gone. "It's in my head," he said hoarsely. "The voices, they don't stop when I leave. They followed me home." Morgan sat heavily. "We can't just ignore it. If we do, more people vanish." He rubbed his face. "You're talking about going back again?" She met his gaze. "Don't have a choice." The following day, they tracked down Elijah Crow. He lived in a trailer 10 miles from town, tucked into a ravine like he was hiding from the sky. The place reeked of tobacco and dust. Crow watched them with wary eyes. As they entered, "You didn't listen?" he rasped. Morgan leaned forward. "What is Ashthorne? What's in that chamber?" Crow lit a cigarette with shaking hands. When the miners first came, they thought they struck silver. But what they found wasn't ore. It was hollowness, a vein of nothing that wasn't empty. It whispered to them, told them how to build that thing, said it would give them riches, luck, power, but it lied. All it wanted was people. The more they gave it, the longer the town lived. When folks stopped feeding it, the town died. But the mouth doesn't die, it waits. Maddox scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. So what? You're saying the whole town was some kind of cult sacrifice pit? Crow exhaled smoke. I'm saying the Mercers weren't the first, and they won't be the last. That jeep didn't come back for nothing. It came back to call more food. Morgan's stomach turned. Then how do we stop it? Crow's pale eyes narrowed. Don't. You starve it, maybe. But it'll always wake again. Best you can do is leave it buried and pray it forgets your name. But the mouth hadn't forgotten. That night, Morgan dreamed again. She stood in Ashthorne's streets, dust swirling. The jeep idled in the lot, headlights sweeping. From every window and every boarded building, faces pressed outward. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Their mouths moved in unison, but no sound came. Then one window shattered. Claire stepped through, her skin waxy pale, eyes wide. She raised her hand, palm out, just as in the photo. Her lips formed the words, "Don't listen," behind. Her, something vast unfolded, taller than the buildings, its form shifting like smoke and wind. It had no face. But Morgan knew it was watching her. She woke, choking on dust, though her bedroom windows were shut. At dawn, Maddox called. His voice was ragged. They took the deputy. It was the one who had fled the motel chamber. His body was never found. Search teams scoured the desert. It discovered only his badge, bent and blackened. Lying at the edge of Ashthorne's main street, the sheriff pulled Morgan and Maddox off the case, calling them compromised, unstable. But neither of them cared. They knew the truth. No, Ashthorne wasn't done. They returned that night without authorization. The town was darker than ever, sky moonless, silence absolute. The motel loomed, boards rattling faintly, though no wind. Moved on inside, the staircase gaped, waiting. Morgan gripped her flashlight. We end this. Maddox's jaw was tight. He didn't argue. They descended once more into the chamber. The hum greeted them like a heartbeat. The machine pulsed, brighter. Now veins of light threading across the rock walls. Voices echoed faintly. Daniel's, Claire's, others, dozens. Hundreds all tangled into a chorus. Stay, stay. Morgan stepped closer, forcing her voice steady. We're not staying. The machine flared, shadows writhing. First time, something emerged from it. It was shaped like a man. It stretched proportions wrong, joints bending the wrong way. Its face was a shifting blur. Sometimes Daniel's, sometimes Claire's, sometimes strangers. It stepped forward, and the chamber groaned around it. Maddox raised his weapon. What the hell's that? The thing tilted its head, mouths within. Mouths whispering from its face. Hungry. Morgan fired first. The bullets tore through it, but the thing didn't bleed. It unraveled into dust, reforming. The hum spiked, deafening, rattling stone loose from the ceiling. The chamber wasn't just a mouth. It was a throat. And now something was climbing out. The chamber walls shuddered, as though the earth itself was breathing. Dust sifted down, coating Morgan's tongue with grit. The thing that had stepped from the pulsing core swayed like it was learning to stand, limbs jittering between too many. Shapes. Its face shifted again, settling on Daniel Mercer's for an instant. His mouth opened wide, far wider than human anatomy allowed, and Claire's voice came spilling out. Please, help us. Morgan felt her knees buckle. Maddox grabbed her arm, yanking her back. It's not them. It's using them, the figure. Lunged, impossibly fast, its arm stretching longer than bone should allow. Maddox fired, shots cracking in the stone chamber. The bullets ripped through air, hitting nothing. The thing dissolved into dust and light, then reformed closer. Whispers hissing from all sides. Stay, stay, stay. Morgan forced herself forward, raising the flashlight, beam cutting across the chamber. The carvings on the walls, the spirals, the jagged circles were glowing faintly now, pulsing with the same rhythm as the core. She realized with a sick twist, they weren't random, they were instructions, diagrams for feeding the mouth. The figure froze as her light passed over the words. Shuddering violently, its face fractured between dozens of visages. The whispers broke into a scream that rattled the chamber. Maddox seized the moment, dragging Morgan toward the stairs. Move. They scrambled up, boots pounding. Behind them, the chamber roared like a collapsing mine shaft. The machines, spiked into a shriek. The thing didn't follow, but the sound did, chasing them through the motel until they burst out into night air. Ashthorne's streets were no longer silent. Every boarded window rattled, shaking in rhythm with the hum. Boards split. Nails squealed. Faces pressed outward from the wood itself. Dozens, hundreds, stretching grain until it cracked. They weren't reflections this time.
They were there, Daniel.
Claire, the missing deputy. Strangers long forgotten, all mouthing the same word. Stay. Morgan and Maddox sprinted for the cruiser. The air grew thick, heavy like water, each breath a battle. They slammed inside, engine roaring, tires spitting. Dust as they tore down the road. Behind them, town pulsed with lightin', entire settlement breathing as one. They didn't stop until the highway's neon signs reappeared, motels and diners and life. Only then did they pull over, gasping, coated in sweat and dust. Maddox's hands trembled on the wheel. Tell me I didn't see that. Morgan couldn't answer. The image of Claire's face pressed into splintering wood seared behind her eyelids. Back at the bureau, they tried to report what they'd seen, but the words died in their throats. How do you explain a town that moves like a living thing?
Ow.
Do you prove faces in wood? The sheriff listened, eyes narrowing before cutting them off. You two need rest. Leave Ashthorne alone. Case is closed. But Morgan knew it wasn't closed. Not when her radio still whispered at night. Not when the Jeep's engine ticked cool every time she passed the impound lot, though nobody had touched it in days. That evening, Elijah Crow appeared at her door. His pale eyes burned with urgency. You woke it up? He said flatly. Morgan gritted her teeth. It was already awake. Not like this. You went into its throat. You let it taste you. Her stomach turned. What does it want? Crow's face creased like brittle paper. It doesn't want. It eats. And once it's marked you, it doesn't stop until you're gone. Maddox arrived minutes later, pale and frantic. He held up his phone. Look. The Polaroid they had found in the chamber was now in his Photos app. Dozens of copies, each time stamped to the minute. More appeared as they watched, every one showing them in that chamber, flashlights raised, expressions frozen. Morgan felt her chest tighten. It's spreading. Crow's voice rasped. It's following you. You can't fight it with bullets or badges. The only way to end it is to starve it. Maddox snapped. How? Tell us how. The old man's gaze flicked. Between them, something was left behind when the Mercers vanished. Something that tied them to this side. It's a Jeep. It's the tether. Burn it, and maybe you cut the mouth's hold. Morgan's thoughts spun, destroyed the Jeep, the only physical piece of the Mercers they had, the only proof. But when she looked at Maddox, she saw the same conclusion in his eyes. They were already marked. Yes, they didn't try. Ashthorne would take them piece by piece until nothing remained. That night, their desert sky shivering with stars, they broke into the impound. Lot. The Jeep sat waiting, pale and patient. Morgan struck the match herself, hand trembling as she dropped it onto the trail of gasoline they'd poured. Flames caught instantly, racing up the sides, devouring cracked leather, curling paint into blistered black. The engine roared alive as fire consumed it, headlights flaring one last time, sweeping across their faces like recognition. Then, with a shuddering groan, it collapsed in on itself, choking out black smoke. For a moment, silence. Then, from far away, too far, yet unmistakable, came a howl. Not wind, not coyote. The sound of something vast and starving. Ashthorne was awake, and fire hadn't ended it. The fire left Morgan hollow. The Jeep's husk still smoldered when dawn came, a blackened skeleton crouched in the impound lot. She hadn't slept. Maddox hadn't either, his face pale, drawn, eyes hollow, Pitt staring at nothing. Yet when the radio hissed to life at sunrise, both of them froze. Static first, then the faintest echo of Claire's voice. "It hurts." Maddox slammed the dial off, but the sound didn't die. It hung in the air, vibrating in the walls, the window glass, even in their teeth. Morgan felt bile rise in her throat. Fire hadn't destroyed the tether. It had only made it scream louder. By noon, reports started trickling into the bureau. Motorists along Route 19 claimed they saw the burned Jeep driving parallel to them across the desert. Lights flaring in broad daylight, engine howling though no wheels touched ground. The sheriff ordered silence, told them to ignore the calls. But the deputy who'd taken the reports showed up at Morgan's desk, eyes wide, whispering, "I saw it too, out outside my window last night." Morgan and Maddox exchanged a look. They both knew what it meant. The Jeep wasn't gone. The mouth had simply moved closer. That evening they drove back into the desert. The sky stretched flat and bruised, clouds low and swollen with dust. The town of Ashthorne waited ahead, not in ruins this time, but alive, lights burning in windows, faint smoke curling from chimneys. As though it had never been abandoned at all, Morgan's breath caught. It's rebuilding itself. Maddox tightened his grip on the wheel, or we're seeing it the way it wants to be seen. They pulled to the edge of town and stepped out. The air smelled of smoke and hot iron. Somewhere, a radio played faint 1950s music. Skipping like a broken record, the streets bustled not with people, but with silhouettes. Figures drifted in and out of doorways, transparent, looping the same motions again and again, carrying groceries, tipping hats, opening mail. A whole town stuck in an endless reel. Then one turned its head. Morgan's blood froze. The figure's face was Daniel's. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, the loop broke. He stepped toward them, lips moving. "You came back." Maddox raised his gun, but Morgan caught his arm. "Wait." Daniel's form flickered, sometimes solid, sometimes static. He looked desperate, exhausted, as though something chewed on the edges of his existence. "We tried to leave," he said. "We thought the road would carry us out, but every mile bent back here. The town doesn't let go. The mouth doesn't let go." Morgan's voice cracked. "Claire, where is she?" "Ah." Daniel's expression twisted. "Inside, feeding it. Keeping it alive." Behind him, the silhouettes stopped their routines, turning in unison. Dozens of faces staring, hollow and expectant. The hum began again, deep and resonant, shaking the air. The ground beneath their feet rippled like water. Maddox yanked Morgan back toward the car, but Daniel lunged forward, his hands suddenly solid, burning cold clamped onto hers. "You can still leave," he rasped. "But if you stay, if you keep looking, it will take you too." Morgan tore free. Daniel collapsed, dissolving into ash that scattered on the wind. The other silhouettes began to advance, movements jerky, inhuman, as though pulled by invisible strings. Maddox fired into the nearest one. The bullet passed through, useless. They kept coming, silent, dozens now, maybe hundreds, filling the street. They barely made it into the cruiser. Tires spun on loose dirt as Maddox gunned it. The figures surged after them, but once they crossed the threshold of the highway, they froze, stuck like insects in amber. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Maddox said, "We can't go back." Morgan stared at the receding outline of Ashthorne, her chest aching. The radio crackled once more. This time, not Claire. Not Daniel, a child's voice whispered, hungry. Morgan turned the dial until it snapped off in her hand. That night she dreamed of the Jeep driving slowly past her apartment window. Inside, Claire sat in the passenger seat, eyes hollow, mouth moving, but the sound didn't come from her lips. It came from the dark well of her throatan, endless chorus of voices begging to be let out. She woke screaming, only to hear Maddox pounding at her door. His shirt was soaked in sweat, his hair wild. "There in my apartment," he gasped. Faces in the mirrors, every surface. It's spreading. Morgan didn't argue. She grabbed her keys, her badge, and together they drove. Not toward Ashthorne this time, but away miles of black highway, trying to outrun a hunger that had no body, no boundaries. But when they stopped for gas in a nameless desert station, the pump's glass face showed her reflection. Except it wasn't her, it was Claire. And Claire was smiling. The desert stretched endless, every mile marked only by the thin ribbon of asphalt, a single line of neon signs flickering in the distance and then vanishing. Morgan drove because Maddox's hands shook too much. He sat beside her, staring out. The window, muttering under his breath words she couldn't always make out, sometimes names, sometimes fragments of prayers, sometimes just numbers counting backward. They didn't talk about what they saw in Ashthorne. Words couldn't hold it anyway. The moment you tried to explain, the thing warped, grew teeth, slipped into the room with you. Silence was safer, but the silence had changed. It wasn't empty. It hummed now, low and constant, in the car and the bones of their skulls, the wires above the highway. They pulled into a truck stop just before dawn. The place looked abandoned at first rows of rusted pumps. A diner with cracked windows, a buzzing sign that read simply, "Eat." But when Morgan stepped inside, the air was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and grease. Every booth was full. Men in flannel shirts, women in Sunday dresses, truckers with caps pulled low, all of them sitting perfectly still, eyes wide, staring straight ahead. Plates of food sat untouched, congealed. The surface of the coffee unbroken. At the counter, a waitress with a beehive hairdo and chipped red lipstick smiled at her. The smile was too wide. It's practiced. "Coffee?" she asked, though her voice didn't come from her mouth. It came from the overhead speaker, flat and distorted like a tape loop. Maddox tugged her arm. "We shouldn't be here." The waitress leaned closer. Her breath smelled like ash. "You already are." The walls vibrated. The jukebox in the corner crackled, light sputtering. A song began to play, but backward, notes unspooling into static. Morgan grabbed Maddox and shoved him toward the exit. The second they crossed the threshold, every person in the diner turned their heads in perfect unison, eyes locking on them. Not one blinked. They didn't run until they were back on the road. Morgan's chest burned, her lungs raw. Maddox was whispering again, but louder now, the words tumbling out frantic. "It doesn't let you leave. It makes new towns, new faces. It plants them, seeds in every reflection, every radio, every silence. It's growing." Morgan slammed the wheel with her palm. "Then we cut it out. We end it." "How?" His voice broke. "How do you kill something that isn't anywhere because it's everywhere?" The answer came hours later, when they reached the outskirts of Los Perthas. Not a ghost town. This was real. A mining settlement turned husk after the collapse. Nothing left but slag piles and a leaning water tower. But the moment Morgan stepped onto the cracked main street, she felt it. The hum was louder here. The ground trembled faintly, like the pulse of a massive heart deep underground. Maddox crouched, pressing his palm to the dirt. It's beneath us. Buried. Not just a mouth. It's a body. Morgan scanned the ruins. Rusted machinery leaned against collapsed walls. Old mine shafts gaped like black wounds in the earth, and from one of them, a faint red glow seeped upward. She felt herself drawn to it, like iron to a magnet. Her feet moved before she could think, carrying her closer. Maddox's hand shot out, gripping her arm so hard it hurt. "Don't look," he rasped. "That's how it pulls you in. You look too long, and it takes your eyes, takes your mind." But Morgan already saw. Deep in the shaft, far below, something writhed too vast to name, its surface slick breathing, not flesh, not stone. Something older. Something awake. The radio in the cruiser snapped on by itself. A voice filled the air, layered. A chorus of dozens, men, women, children, all speaking at once. "Feed us. Join us. Become us." Maddox raised his gun and fired into the shaft. The bullet vanished into the glow without sound. The thing didn't react. Instead, the ground quaked harder. Cracks ripped through the dirt, swallowing the rusted machinery, the crumbling shacks. From the mine shaft's rim, figures began to crawl out. They weren't the silhouettes of Ashthorn. These were solid, twisted bodies with faces stretched too wide, mouths splitting from ear to ear. Their eyes glowed faint red like embers. Morgan grabbed Maddox and ran. The cruiser roared to life, tires spitting dust. Behind them, the town collapsed inward, buildings folding like paper into the earth. In the rear-view mirror, she saw the water tower topple and sink, and the glows, spreading under the desert floor, racing outward like veins of fire beneath the surface. Maddox's voice was hoarse, almost gone. It's waking. And it's not just Ashthorn. It's every dead town, every ruin, every place forgotten. All of them connected. All of them mouths. Oh! Morgan drove until night, until the desert blurred into shadow. Her hands ached from gripping the wheel. The hum was louder than ever. So loud she thought her eardrums would rupture. She pulled over finally, shaking headlights cutting through a flat stretch of sand. Maddox slumped against the window, eyes half shut. That's when she noticed the shapes outside. Dozens of car sidons. Trucks, motorcycles lined neatly on the desert floor, headlights glowing though no engines ran. Inside each vehicle, a driver sat perfectly still, hands on the wheel, eyes locked on her. Claire was in the front seat of the nearest car. Her lips moved, but Morgan couldn't hear. Then the radios inside every vehicle switched on at once, blaring the same whisper, over and over, layered until it became a scream. You belong here now. Morgan slammed the cruiser into reverse. The headlights of the other cars flared, blinding white, converging. The desert became a burning grid of light and sound, and in the center of it all, through the glare, she saw the Jeep. Daniel at the wheel. Claire beside him, both smiling. Morgan couldn't breathe. Desert was no longer dark, it blazed with the glow of headlights. Every beam converging, cutting her down to a figure caught in some eternal spotlight. Her cruiser's engine howled as she threw it into gear, but the tires spun uselessly in sand, going nowhere. The cars surrounding them did not move. Their engines weren't even running, yet the lights burned brighter, searing her retinas. While the voices from their radios shrieked the same phrase in an endless loop, "You belong here now. You belong here now. You belong here now." Maddox was clawing at his ears, blood running between his fingers. Turn it off. Make it stop. His voice was lost in the tide. Morgan slammed her palm against the dash. Shut up. She screamed, though she knew it wasn't to him. And then abruptly, it did. The lights blinked out all at once, plunging the desert into a suffocating black. Morgan's vision swam, her eyes burned. She blinked hard and saw after-image eyes Claire's. Face, Daniel's smile, the ghost of the Jeep's headlights cutting across the desert road. When the spots cleared, every car was gone. The desert stretched empty and endless again, except the Jeep. It idled 50 feet away, engine purring, its paintwork gleaming as if untouched by time. Daniel sat at the wheel, hands steady, eyes fixed on her. Claire was beside him, her head tilted slightly, lips curved into a gentle, impossible smile. Morgan staggered from the cruiser before she could stop herself. Her boots crunched on sand as she moved closer, step by step, until she could see the condensation on the Jeep's windshield. The faint outline of Daniel's hand tapping the wheel like he used to when impatient. "Don't," Maddox croaked. From behind her, he pulled himself into the driver's seat, clutching the gun, though it hung loose in his grip. "Morgan, don't look at them." But she couldn't look away. Claire leaned forward, and her lips moved again. This time, Morgan heard it faint, as though whispered from underwater, "Come home." Her chest tightened. For one insane second, she thought of climbing in, of feeling the warmth of Claire's hand in hers again. The Jeep's familiar rumble beneath her. Then Daniel's head turned. Too far? His neck bent past human limits, rotating until his chin nearly touched his spine, yet his smile never faltered. His eyes were hollow sockets filled with red light. Morgan stumbled back. The Jeep's engine roared, headlights blinding. Once more, Sand shifted beneath its tires, though it didn't move forward like the earth itself was pulling it under. "Morgan!" Maddox screamed. She ran behind her. The sound of metal screeching against stone ripped through the desert. She didn't look back. Not until she was inside the cruiser again. Door slamming. Hands trembling on the wheel. The Jeep was gone. But in its place, burned into the sand, was a perfect set of tire tracks, leading off into the dark, deeper into the desert. Maddox was shaking uncontrollably. "It's not them. It's never them. You know that. You know it." Morgan's throat was raw. "But it remembers them. It wears them." And that was worse. They drove without speaking, following no map, no plan, just the instinct that told Morgan the thing wasn't finished with them, that every road led back to it, no matter which direction she turned. By dawn, they reached a cluster of gas pumps and a boarded-up motel. It's a kind that might once have served Route 66 travelers decades ago. The pumps were shattered, glass long gone from the windows, but the sign out front still swung in the hot wind. Desert Star Motel. Maddox insisted they stop. His skin was gray, his pupils too wide. Inside, the air was cooler. Dust coated every surface, the lobby desks stacked with yellowed registration cards. Morgan flipped one open and froze. Her name, her handwriting, checked in. August 18th, 2025, Room 7. She looked up. Maddox held another card. His hands trembled as he turned it to her. His name. His date. His room. Room 6. A sound creaked overhead, floorboards shifting as if under weight. Slowly, they both tilted their heads back, through the cracked ceiling. Faint light glowed seeping between the boards. Someone was up there. Morgan's heart pounded. They climbed the narrow stairs together, each step groaning, until they reached the second-floor hall. The doors were numbered in faded brass. 6. Room 7. Both doors stood ajar. Inside her room, the bed was neatly made. A suitcase sat at the foot, her suitcase, the one she'd left years ago when Claire disappeared. Inside, folded clothes smelled faintly of ash. On the nightstand sat a Polaroid. She picked it up with shaking hands. It showed her standing in that very room, smiling, arm around Claire, but her eyes were wrong, her smile too wide. Maddox swore from the other room. She ran in and found him staring at his own Polaroid, him standing beside his partner, long dead. Both of them frozen in a moment that never happened. The walls began to tremble. Every door in the hallway creaked open. Figures stepped out. Guests, dressed in clothing from a dozen different decades, faces pale and stiff, eyes glassy. Each one held a Polaroid, and each Polaroid showed Morgan. Maddox sometimes together, sometimes alone, sometimes standing with strangers, always smiling. The guests opened their mouths in unison. From them came not a scream, but a deafening static. Like every television in the world tuned to dead channels, Morgan dropped her photo. She and Maddox bolted, crashing down the stairs, out into the blinding desert sun. Behind them, the motel's facade seemed to ripple, colors shifting, walls bending inward like paper curling in flame. The desert star sign swung violently until it tore free and crashed to the ground. The building collapsed inward with a thunderous sigh, leaving only dust. When it cleared, the land was flat. No motel, no sign, not even rubble. Maddox was on his knees, gasping. Morgan's hands wouldn't stop shaking. The tire tracks were still there. Those stretching endlessly into the desert, waiting for them to follow, and far off, at the edge of the horizon, she thought she saw a shape. Not a car this time, not a building, a tower. It's black, impossibly tall, rising out of the desert like a single jagged tooth, for the first time since Ashthorn. She felt something worse than fear, recognition. The tower loomed like it had always been there, a monument carved from the marrow of the desert itself. From a distance it seemed skeletal, an illusion of sharp edges against the morning haze. But as Morgan and Maddox drew closer, its surface writhed. The stone, or whatever it was, shifted like overlapping scales, black glass rippling with faint movements beneath. It was not a building. It was alive. The Jeep's tire tracks led directly to its base. Neither of them spoke. Words felt fragile here, as if language itself might shatter under the weight of what surrounded them. The desert stretched silent for miles in every direction, yet the air vibrated with a low-frequency hum that neither the wind nor the earth could explain. Morgan's throat burned with thirst, but she ignored it. Every cell in her body screamed to turn back, but the truth hung in that tower. Claire's face, Daniel's hollow smile, the motel's Polaroids, they were threads of the same tapestry. And this place was its loom. When they finally reached the base, Morgan realized the tower had no doors, no windows. Just a smooth expanse of shifting black surface that rose far higher than any human structure could stand. But the tire tracks didn't stop, they vanished into the wall, as though the stone itself had swallowed them whole. Maddox pressed a hand against the surface. His palm sank an inch into it, as though pressing into cold tar. Yanked it back with a curse. His skin, slick with a substance darker than oil. Morgan touched it too. The material pulsed once beneath her hand like a heartbeat. Then it opened. The wall parted with a slow, wet tearing sound, revealing a slit of pure darkness within. There was no discussion. They stepped through. Inside there was no floor, no ceiling, only void. Yet their feet found purchase on unseen ground. Black mist swirled around them, carrying whispers not in their ears, but inside their skulls, half-formed words. Fragments of voices both familiar and unknown. And then the mist cleared. They were in a town, Ashthorn, but not the Ashthorn they'd left behind. This was older, cracked, sun-bleached to bone. The streets were filled with figures frozen mid-step, shopkeepers with their wares, children with their toys, travelers caught in endless stride, all unmoving, all carved from the same shifting black. Substance as the tower. Morgan walked past a figure of a young woman holding a grocery bag. Her face was sculpted in such precision it hurt the detail of every eyelash, every wrinkle in her dress. But her mouth was open, frozen in a silent scream. "They're all here," Maddox whispered. His voice was broken glass. "Every missing person, every damn one." As if to answer, the statues trembled. Slowly heads turned. Not all at once, but like a wave. One figure at a time twisting to look at them. Eyes hollow and burning faint red, and they began to move. Not walking, not running, simply shifting, like they were being pulled by invisible strings. Every limb jerked out of sync, as though the bodies remembered the concept of motion but not its execution. Morgan grabbed Maddox's arm and dragged him into the nearest building, a diner she recognized from case files, one that had burned down in the 70s. Inside, the booths were lined with more statues. A family sat at one, heads tilted back at impossible angles, mouths open. On the counter sat a jukebox. It flickered with life, humming a tune that wasn't music but static shaped into rhythm. "Morgan," Maddox said quietly. She turned. Claire was sitting in one of the booths. Not a statue, a black stone. Flesh, hair, eyes. She looked exactly as she had 5 years ago when she disappeared. Morgan's chest collapsed inward. Every instinct screaming to touch her, to hold her, to believe. But Claire's eyes were wrong. Too wide, too empty. She smiled. "You found me." Her voice was perfect, too perfect. Morgan's hand hovered inches from Claire's cheek before Maddox yanked her back. "It's not her," he hissed. Claire tilted her head, bird-like. He's right. "But it doesn't matter. You came anyway." The air in the diner warped. Statues outside pressed against the windows, their faces distorting the glass. The hum grew louder, shaking the walls. Claire what wore her stood. The diner bent with her movement, reality creasing like paper around her frame. Her face flickered between Claire's, Daniel's, Maddox's lost partner, Morgan's own. Each one smiled the same way. "We needed you," it said. "And now you're here? You will never leave again." Maddox fired. The bullet tore through the figure's skull. Black fluid splattered the booth, sizzling as it hit the counter. Claire's body collapsed, then reassembled itself, every drop of liquid crawling back into shape, knitting bone, stitching flesh. The smile remained. Morgan grabbed Maddox's arm. Run. They crashed through the back door into an alley, sprinting as the town shifted around them. Streets folded like cards, buildings stretched and warped. The sky itself bending until the sun was a thin slit of white above, and always behind them. The sound of footsteps not natural, but a million mismatched rhythms, an army of bodies. Learning to walk again, they reached the center of town. The Jeep was waiting. It sat gleaming, engine rumbling, headlights burning steady. The driver's door opened on its own, beckoning. Morgan froze. It was a trap. She knew it. Maddox knew it. And yet what other choice was there? The footsteps closed in, shadows stretched, faces flickered. The diner figure walked calmly through. The horde, wearing Claire's body like a mask, smiling still. Morgan met Maddox's eyes. Neither spoke. They ran for the Jeep. The seats were warm, as if someone had just left them. The radio hissed with static. Morgan slammed it into gear. Tires screeched, burning black marks into the shifting street. The horde swarmed after them, arms outstretched, voices joining into a single phrase. A single command that rattled the Jeep's frame. Stay, stay, stay. Morgan floored it. The Jeep plowed through the town's main road, buildings collapsing into dust around them. The black mist rose high, swallowing streets, statues, everything, and then dash light. Blinding, the Jeep burst out of the tower's wall, back into the desert. The sun was higher now, the horizon endless. Behind them, the tower shuddered, its surface splitting, shards of black stone spiraling into the sky. A howl shook the desert. The sound of 1,000 voices being dragged under. The tower collapsed inward. Vanishing into the sand, the Jeep rolled to a stop. Silence. Morgan sat frozen, hands gripping the wheel, chest heaving.
Maddox leaned against
The window, eyes wide, as if daring the world to still be real. Finally, Morgan turned the key. The Jeep's engine sputtered once, twice, and died. It would not start again. They climbed out. The desert stretched calm, endless, as though nothing had ever happened. No tower, no motel, no statues, only 2 sets of tire tracks, leading nowhere. Maddox dropped to the ground, laughing a dry, broken laugh. Morgan stared at the horizon, the heat shimmering, and then she saw it. Far off another town, faint, wavering in the mirage. Buildings, half-formed, signs swinging in hot wind, Ashthorne, waiting.